humblemud.
Every now and then, I take a look at the different consoles I have and start to feel guilty once I realize just how long it's been since I last played them. I'm pretty sure my PlayStation TV is getting flashbacks to how Sony treated it at this point. But seriously, I can take one look at any of these systems and think of 3 to 5 games I've been wanting to try on them. Yes, even with the Wii U. However, there is one console I own that I just kind of stare at like...
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
And look, it's not that I hate my Xbox One. I actually did a 3-month Game Pass challenge last year, and I had a blast beating a bunch of awesome games thanks to that service. But as time has gone on, I realized that I literally only boot up the one to play original Xbox and Xbox 360 games. And while it emulates Xbox originals much better than the 360 ever did and offers nice graphical and performance boosts to 360 games, actually sitting down to play these games on an Xbox One can be such a pain. Every single time I try to just unwind with a couple laps of Hydro Thunder Hurricane or whatever, my Xbox One would require me to log into Xbox Live, prompting me to type in my password in full. Even if I selected Remember Me or whatever that option was, I'd always have to do this every single time I played a 360 game. And sometimes it wouldn't even work and I'd have to retry again and again and again. And I'm not the only one. Look this up and you'll see tons of people dealing with this on their Xbox Ones and Series consoles even to this day. So one day I woke up and just thought, why don't I get an Xbox 360? And so I did. I traded in my Xbox One and Xbox One games for this lovely Star Wars themed 360 that you see here. Today, I'm going to talk about the games I've been playing on this console, how the transition going backwards to the 360 was, as well as go over some troubleshooting steps in case you're thinking about doing this yourself. And towards the end of this video, I'm going to answer whether or not I think I made the right decision after having this console for about a month. Now, of course, I'm aware of the great popular franchises playable on the 360 like Gears of War and Halo. I grew up with those. I've also got some fantastic games waiting for me on my backlog like these, but today I'm going to be focusing on some smaller titles that I've personally broken in my 360 with. I don't know how popular or how obscure these games are nowadays. I'm not saying they're the best ones out there, and I'm not going to be labeling these games as hidden gems or anything. I just think they're fun, and I want to talk about the stuff I'm currently playing. The very first game I popped in and played on my 360 was Naruto Rise of a Ninja. Now, I talked about this game in depth last year, so I won't spend too much time on it. But if you remember, when I got my Xbox One, I also ordered this game as I was looking forward to it, only to find that it wasn't backwards compatible with that system. So even though I have a legit copy of the disc, my only course of action at that time was to
emulate it.
And let me just say, it feels really good to finally be able to play this just off the disc now. Call me crazy, but I think it looks better on the real thing too. I don't know. Rise of a Ninja is a wonderful 3D action-adventure game that covers the early parts of the show, complete with challenging 2.5D fighting sequences and surprisingly addictive collectathon platformer elements. It also has arguably the best gameplay implementation of hand signs of any Naruto game out there, where you hold down the left trigger and then use the analog sticks in certain patterns to mimic performing them. And as far as I'm aware, Rise of a Ninja and its sequel, The Broken Bond, allow you to explore Naruto's world to a much greater extent than any other Naruto game. It's really immersive, the graphics here are better than a lot of anime games you see even today, and you don't have to be a Naruto fan to enjoy this. Ridge Racer 6 is a game that is playable on modern Xbox consoles, but is still a blast on the 360, and I played it first here. This one is like Hydro Thunder Hurricane for me in the sense that I grew up with a 5th gen Ridge Racer, that being Ridge Racer Type 4, but I never got to play any of its sequels until now. And so, like going from the Nintendo 64 port of Hydro Thunder to Hurricane on the 360, going from Type 4 on the PS1 to Ridge Racer 6 on the 360 is kind of like reconnecting with an old familiar friend and thankfully seeing that they're happy and thriving. And while I certainly think Type 4 is better overall in the vibe department, something I never expected to love about Ridge Racer 6, and something that I think it does better, is driving in first person. Now, I never drive first person in my arcade racers, but something about the way they did it here just feels right. In fact, I prefer driving this way in this game. It feels faster from this perspective, and most importantly, I think they did a really good job framing everything such that you have a good sense of space around your vehicle, and it is such a rush seeing cars come up from behind you in your rear view and trying to block them from passing you. And just to clarify, I'm aware that you can drive in first person in Type 4, I just think Ridge Racer 6 did it better. Driving in first person here is really immersive, and something else that adds to that immersion is that when you drive over varying terrain, your controller will vibrate in different ways to reflect that. So for example, if you leave the smooth pavement and drive over cobblestones or bricks, or when you drive over those expansion joints, I had to look that term up for this video, you're welcome, those expansion joints that you see on bridges and stuff, your controller will respond just like it does driving in real life when you hit those bumps. I'm also a big fan of just how often Namco reminds you that they were the ones who invented Pac-Man. If I were them, I'd probably do the same thing. Now, this next one is actually the first game I beat on my new 360, Velvet Assassin. This is also available on Steam, but I'm not sure what its compatibility with newer PC systems is like, so be careful. It's always hit or miss with games from this gen. In this game, you play as Violet Summer, who is loosely inspired by a real-life British-French agent who did some really helpful and badass stuff in World War II. So much so that she was posthumously awarded the George Cross, which is the highest British honor that she could have hoped to obtain for her particular efforts. I'd highly recommend you read up on her story. Anyways, while Velvet Assassin is only loosely based on this real-life agent, what it does a great job of showing you are the horrors of World War II. When we think of Generation 7 consoles especially, this generation was all about these buff war heroes who could run headfirst into the heat of battle and crack skulls left and right with their 360 no-scopes and chainsaws. A lot of the games from this generation almost glorified war, if you think about it. Meanwhile, Velvet Assassin places you in the shoes of a much more vulnerable protagonist, in a much moodier atmosphere with really engrossing lighting systems, and playing through it will make you reflect on that period of time in a way that popular World War II shooters from that time simply won't. It certainly has its flaws, especially in that final chapter where you're suddenly expected to fight guns a-blazing after being sneaky for the 12 hours prior, and this game is not going to stack up to the likes of Hitman or something, but it was a very memorable experience and I'm so glad I played it. Oh, and speaking of Hitman, Velvet Assassin got me on a real stealth kick, and so I picked up Hitman Blood Money and Absolution. I started with Blood Money since that seems to be the one everyone loves. Now, first off, I'll admit, coming from the newer Hitman 2 to this game, I honestly had some difficulty here and there. The controls are not great, and there are some things that haven't particularly aged well, especially in that very first chapter. Just putting that out there in case you decide to try this game for the first time after watching my video. However, once you can get past some of those hurdles, the game really opens up, and a few missions in, I was really enjoying myself. The locations in Blood Money are absolutely wonderful, varied, and somewhat cozy at times, and the OST is sublime. Oh my gosh. Now, just another forewarning, Blood Money does not hold your hand whatsoever, and so there will be times where you just kind of aren't sure what to do. It requires a lot of experimentation in that sense. But the nice thing about this is once you do figure out something on your own, it's very rewarding. I absolutely see why this one is considered a classic, and I'm proud that I stuck with this game because it's been a blast. I haven't gotten to Absolution yet, but I did hear that it's a bit of a departure from the typical Hitman formula, so I'm going into that one with an open mind for sure. Now, NightCaster is a game that I do know is obscure, as pretty much no one talks about it, and it was basically a launch title for the original Xbox, releasing within the first 3 months of that system's launch. This is a game only playable on the Xbox or Xbox 360, and despite some drops in frame rate here and there, and the fact that the voiceovers just cut out randomly mid-sentence.
Hurry! Goblin riders have attacked! Chasing villagers!
Okay. This game is certainly playable on the 360. I went all the way through it. I'm going to do an in-depth focused video on this game specifically, so keep an eye out for that, but just know for now that NightCaster is essentially what you would get if you were to cross something like Gauntlet Legends with Quest 64. To some of you, that may have just made your stomach do a flip, but if you know me, this was right up my alley. Stay tuned for my future video on this one. I'm having a lot of fun making it. Now, these next ones I've just kind of started and have only gotten to put a little bit of time into it relative to the others on this list. Keep in mind, I've only had my 360 for about a month now, but nevertheless, I felt like these games deserved a spot in this video. I got Marvel Ultimate Alliance at the same place I found those Hitman games, and I know some of you guys around my age probably just died of nostalgia seeing this. I am so happy to have a copy of this again. Oddly enough, the version I got was packed in with Forza Motorsport 2, which is such a weird pairing to me, but hey, I'm not going to complain. The Ultimate Alliance and X-Men Legends games are such classics, but they're tied up in a type of licensing hell that games like Naruto Rise of a Ninja are all too familiar with. Unfortunately, that means that unless you were able to snag this on like the PlayStation Store or something before it was removed, or you get the Switch exclusive Ultimate Alliance 3, there isn't an easy modern way to play these games anymore. And revisiting it now, the dialogue does feel a little corny at times considering I'm not 12 years old anymore, but these games were still so cool for bringing these characters together pre-MCU, and I think the fact that they were able to marry that star power so well with a multiplayer Diablo-type game experience was genius. Lost Planet Colonies Edition, which I didn't even realize is basically the definitive edition of this game, I got for super cheap at a Goodwill, I believe, and it's been, no pun intended, cool to finally see what this game is all about. I remember seeing it everywhere back in the day, and I always thought it was like an open world survival type game, but it's actually a mission-based third-person shooter crossed with mech combat. Really unique stuff, and though this is an example of the games from that era where a lot of Japanese companies were trying to cater to an American audience, and as a result producing some flops, to say the least, rest assured that if you've never played this before and are curious, this is a very Capcom-ass game. There's some Mega Man in here, there's some Bionic Commando in here, a little Monster Hunter, we've got the stiff, early Resident Evil type of dialogue.
How's the PDA analysis going?
Oh, it's done now. We've updated the map, so take a look.
Nevek.
Yuri.
Oh, it's nothing.
Lost Planet, at least the first one, is a Capcom game through and through. And keeping with that last theme, the last game I wanted to shout out is another Americanized game from a big Japanese gaming company, that being The Club, published surprisingly by Sega of all companies. I found out about this game through the channel Command and Console, and his enthusiasm talking about it, plus seeing how cheap it was, just absolutely won me over. This is an interesting game with an unfortunately generic branding and title that combines stuff that shouldn't mix, but it works. In this game, you'll find a third-person shooter in the vein of something like Gears of War, but with a roster and announcer that feels like they belong in a fighting game. You've got all these characters from different corners of the world, and before you even start a match, the announcer of course yells stuff like,
Fight!
and then once you hop into the game, you'll find that it also incorporates gameplay elements like the trick system from Tony Hawk, and you might find yourself racing laps against the clock like you do in racing games. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense to add elements like these to a shooter on the surface, but once you get in there, what you're in for is a really fun arcade shooting experience. There are a variety of gameplay modes and locations here, and it's a game that, while I'm still getting the feel for it, especially when it comes to controller sensitivity and aiming, I feel a sense of progression every single time I boot it up and give it a go. The only thing that I think is sorely lacking from this game is an endless horde mode. I think my brother and I would have absolutely torn something like that up back in the day, but the timed survival / King of the Hill mode scratches that itch well enough. It got mixed reviews as you might expect, and I think that's because it's really only for a specific type of gamer, but thankfully, I'm that type. Thank you for putting me onto this Command and Console. And now for this next section of the video, I wanted to talk about how the transition back to the 360 from my Xbox One was, both the good and bad, so that if you're curious or you're thinking about doing it yourself, you're aware of what to look out for. First off, the biggest thing to note, the Xbox 360 wasn't able to play original Xbox games natively, so that means it was actually emulating these original Xbox games, and said emulation of original Xbox games on the 360 is not a great experience. While I was able to play through NightCaster with minor issues, games like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic was awful on the 360. I'm talking like frame rate drops down below 20 frames a second at times, and battles with more than 2 enemies can get extremely choppy. It's actually pretty embarrassing, and To be honest, it was disappointing as, considering that this is a Star Wars 360, I was hoping to enjoy that game for the first time on this console. I guess I'll have to try Star Wars The Force Unleashed instead. On the bright side, when it comes to this game in particular, you can play it just about anywhere nowadays, even on mobile. I myself picked up the Android port and I've been playing it on my Retroid Pocket 5 and it's wonderful that way. By the way, I will eventually make a video sharing my thoughts on the Retroid Pocket 5 as I've had this console for quite a few months now and I have a lot to share, so stay tuned. But back to the topic, when it comes to original Xbox emulation on the 360, I would just be really cautious. I recommend looking into the Wikipedia page on this topic before you make a purchase, or just play it on an original Xbox if you have the option. When I was considering moving back to the 360, a big question that I had, and one that was pretty much the deciding factor for me when it comes to whether or not to quote-unquote downgrade, was whether I would get to keep my digitally downloaded Xbox and Xbox 360 games or not once I moved over. And thankfully the answer is yes for the most part. Some unfortunate losses I incurred once I moved over to the 360 were Timesplitters 2 and Otogi Myth of Demons. These games are backwards compatible on the One in series, but not on the 360. That was unfortunate, of course, so just make sure you research your library before you make any brash decisions. I was able to reobtain certain original Xbox games that I purchased on my One though, like Panzer Dragoon Orta and KOTOR as I said before, and all of my 360 games from what I can tell transferred right over, including arcade titles like Quake Arena, Hydro Thunder Hurricane, Chronicles of Mystara, etc., as well as games with DLC like Asura's Wrath. You can also still buy 360 games backwards compatible with the One in series off of the Xbox Store via your PC, and then they'll show up to download on your 360. That's how I got Ridge Racer 6. It's a sort of roundabout way of doing it since you can't access the 360 store inside the console anymore, but it works and I thought it was worth pointing out. And in case you were wondering, the way you transfer these games over to your console was easy but initially confusing, so I'll explain it here really quick. Once you get your internet set up with the console, go to Settings, Account, Download History, make sure it's Download, not Purchase History, as that one doesn't seem to work anymore, but go to Download History and your game should be there for download. If not, you may need to do a license transfer, which is the option right below. I've already done this, so I can't walk you through it now, but it was very simple and straightforward. You just have to know your Xbox account login information and such, and it'll move right along. I just wanted to go over this here because it's surprisingly not very easy to find an answer to this on Google, and so I just wanted to save you guys some time. So with all of that out of the way, I've discussed some of the downsides and confusing elements behind transitioning back to a 360, and while there have been some drawbacks, the positives far outweigh the negatives in my opinion. As I mentioned earlier, the One and Series consoles often prompt you for login information whenever you boot up a 360 game, requiring you to type in a password every single time. Some have managed to get this to go away, but I was never able to despite every troubleshooting step I took, and it was such a pain, especially because sometimes it refused to accept my password that I knew I typed in correctly. I just can't stress enough how much nicer it is to be playing a game, exit it, and then decide I want to run through a couple laps of Ridge Racer 6 or something, and seeing that Namco logo pop up in seconds. The Xbox will ask you what storage you want to select, which takes a second or two, but after that, you're off to the races, literally. And you can also download games from your disc onto your hard drive to cut down on load times and improve performance, which is a feature that I feel like was very ahead of its time, very modern. And on the topic of feeling modern, the 360 as a whole still feels quite modern in so many ways, despite being just shy of 20 years old at the time of this video's release. I think the games still look really good on average, especially when upscaled with something like an M Classic, and in my non-scientific testing, I found it to be faster than my PS3 Slim, faster than the Wii U, and certainly faster than the Xbox One when it comes to just booting up and loading a game. And I'm well aware that the series is a fast console, but I just think it's worth mentioning how much faster this thing is than some of the consoles that came after it and its contemporaries. And with some minor exceptions here and there, it's really nice to just get a physical copy of a game, often for pretty cheap, take it home, pop it in, and just play without the fear of an install that takes upwards of 30 minutes to an hour. I think out of all the games I've gotten so far, only one had an update, and that update took maybe a minute or so. I miss that more than I realized. Over the brief time I've spent revisiting this console, I've only become more satisfied with my decision to do so. In fact, in the midst of my time revisiting this console, Microsoft announced a lot of price increases across the board while simultaneously announcing that many of their exclusives are going to PlayStation. So when I take this into account as well, I feel even more secure in my decision. When I look at what I lost by going to the 360, I think the only Xbox One exclusive I legitimately don't have a way to play anymore is the Rare Replay collection, which does suck, but I think that overall the gains far outweigh the benefits, especially considering that I'm now seeing a feature where I can get any multiplat I want on the PC or PS5, and if there's ever a day one Game Pass game that I'm interested in, like Doom the Dark Ages or Expedition 33, I can always get a month's worth of Game Pass and then dip once I beat the game. And I don't feel bad about admitting that. This is the market that has been created for better or worse when it comes to Xbox, and overall I think I'm a lot happier with these classic games. It was their golden era for a reason. So did I make a good decision for myself personally? Yeah, absolutely I did. With that said, I'd love to know what you think about my decision. I'd love to hear about your reflections and memories when it comes to the 360, or what you think about what Xbox is doing now. Give me some game recommendations, share your thoughts on the games I just mentioned, any and all thoughts, share them down below. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.